Everyone, today I'm going to show you a Dragon Hunter build. I call it the Diseased Dragon, and that's because anyone who gets near you will be infected with burning. That's right, this is a burning Dragon Hunter build. I use the Carrion amulet for the maximum amount of condition damage. You could go with other condition amulets like wizards, but they just focus on power damage more so than Condi, and like most of my damage does come from burning, so you just want to get as much Condi damage as possible. And Traveler runes, Guardians are kind of balanced by the fact that they really don't have access to swiftness anywhere except on Soaring Devastation, but the thing is you can't really take this trait because you really need the trap trait for this build at least. So basically you have to take Rune of the Traveler because it gives you the movement speed, which you really need just for mobility, and it gives you a little bit of condition damage stats. Like there's links as well, but that's more power oriented, so yeah, you take Traveler for like condition builds that need movement speed. And then I'm running Sword, Torch, Scepter, Focus. You can also take Shield. I use Shield a little bit in twos if I need to like make a play where I interrupt someone's res or something like that. But Focus is a little bit better selfishness and a little bit more extra damage as well. But yeah, Shield is nice for supporting your allies a little bit more. But yeah, both are fine. So I take Doom on both weapon sets, and Exposure on the Scepter, and Intel on the Sword. And we'll get into why I have Intel on the Sword in a little bit, but basically you just want as many cover Condis as possible. So Doom gives poison and Exposure gives vulnerability, because the conditions that you mainly use are burning, right? You don't really have many other conditions. You just have burning, cripple. You'll see you have a lot of cripple as well later, and that's pretty much it. Maybe a little bit of blind here and there. You got some immobilize, but other than that you just have burning. So it's really easy for people with on-demand cleanse to prevent you from killing them. So what you want to do is you want to cover those Condis by swapping weapons, and after you put on those burns you want to cover them so that they have to use more than just a single Condi cleanse to get rid of your burns. So you'll bait out a lot more cooldowns because of these sigils. So yeah, that's pretty much the runes and sigils there. For the traits, I take Radiance, Virtues in Dragon Hunter. I used to be a Zeal fanatic because of the the Sword of Justice and then the Eternal Armory trait, but it just turns out that Sword of Justice is not very good against players who have their movement keys bound. So I ended up running Radiance, and Radiance I thought was kind of bad at first as well because it's too PvE oriented, but it actually isn't terrible because what you basically do is you have a build that's centered around kind of like mobile burning rather than burning just in an area. So like Zeal is very much centered around people standing in your symbols, whereas this build has more mobile damage to it. So you kind of play more like a meditation guardian even though you don't have meditations. But yeah, so Healer's Retribution, I take this because retail is pretty good. A 10-second retail adds up over time. You could take the Sword trait because you do have Sword, but I feel that you're not really, because like what the Sword cooldown is 8 seconds, and taking the trait will put it down to 6, right? Okay, it's 10 and it brings it down to 8, but your weapon swap cooldown is like 9 seconds anyways. So you can pretty much use the sword symbol twice per weapon swap anyways. So the cooldown reduction isn't really that important, I feel. And then obviously the power and precision are irrelevant. And gaining fury could be useful on enemies that have burning over the 3 threshold, but I feel that that's really not that important either, because you get fury from the sword symbol anyways, and you have the intel sigil proc, which makes your crits more reliable for the next trait, which is radiant fire. So you gain Zealot's Flame when you critically hit an enemy, and burning you inflict has increased duration. So I have a increase of 7% burn duration, and torch skills gain reduced recharge. So the torch skills are actually really good right now because they have such a low cooldown and they have quite a huge effect. Cleansing Flame cleanses conditions off your allies, but it also hits the enemy up to 10 times, which procs your Justice passive, which is every time you hit an enemy, you gain a charge of Justice, right? And you'll see later I have Permeating Wrath, so my number of times to trigger the passive is 3 instead of 5. But yeah, basically just hitting as many people as possible is really good with the torch, so that's a really good skill. And of course the 4 skill is really good. So as you can see here, the 4, what it does is when you use it, it puts like a burning aura on yourself. So I use it right here and I'm pulsing burn on the target. It pulses 3 times, so you need to use the skill within the 3rd pulse or before the 3rd pulse. And because you have on a intel sigil, right, you will proc the part of this trait that says whenever you critically hit an enemy. So because I'm Carrion, I have no crit chance, so it's kind of hard to proc this sometimes. But with the intel sigil, it's very reliable to proc it. So what I can do is I start the fight or whatever in Scepter, I sword 2 in, and then I'm going to immediately crit, and that allows me to use Zealot's Flame twice, because this gets procced by the crit, and then I also have another one from just having Torch. And the thing is, even when you use the ability, it's still pulsing out the damage on you of the burning. So I can have 2 pulses of burning going on at the same time, which is pretty insane. So if you look at this, if I hit both of them, I do a 4 burn for 2 seconds. Let me get a combat. So yeah, if I throw the torch at them, it does a 3 burn for 3 seconds, and if I just sit there and pulse on them, it'll pulse for, I think it's actually 4 pulses maybe. Yeah, it's 4 pulses. So it'll pulse on them for 4 burning, and then do 3 burning if I land the Zealot's Fire. So that'll do 7 stacks of burning for around like 2 to 3 seconds, and I can do that twice. So that's 14 stacks of burning, plus my passive proccing on them, plus Zealot's Fire has a really high base damage of 1k, and that can crit with my intel sigil. So as you can see here, I'm gonna go on the target, and I'm gonna crit with my Zealot's Flame. Maybe not. Yeah, it just does like insane damage there. And I got like a 3k burn tick at one point, and you can do a lot of stuff with that, and it's really low cooldown. So yeah, it's really good. So yeah, that's pretty much the reasoning for taking Radiance, is this trait by itself with Torch. You just gain so much burst damage with the Torch. Next, you have a little bit of crit. Yeah, so you have some crit chance here as well, which can proc some of your Torch traits when you don't have the Intel Sigil, and you have the Fury from Symbol of Blades. So you can still crit sometimes, but yeah, otherwise not too important. Amplified Wrath gives the burning that I inflict increased damage, which is really important because burning is my main source of damage. So it's kind of like a 15% damage increase overall, almost. Like, it's pretty good. But also, because I'm running Carrion Amulet, it's just focusing more on my condition damage. So yeah, you just want to keep scaling that up as high as possible. So also, burning duration applied by the Virtue of Justice passive effect is increased. So it's increased by 20%. Now, as you'll see here, we have Permeating Wrath. We'll just skip ahead to this. Virtue of Justice's passive triggers more quickly and now burns in an area. So it's an AoE of 240 radius. So compare that to, what's 240 radius? So this is 240 radius. So whenever I hit a target and my Justice passive triggers, it's going to hit a radius of about that much around it. And it's how many targets? It's 5. So it can hit up to 5 targets with the AoE. And this is really good because if you're hitting in an AoE, it's kind of like an exponential effect, right? Because not only am I proccing the AoE on the Justice passive, but I'm proccing the Justice passive faster because I'm hitting more targets. So if you look here, I'll just do a Scepter symbol. This will hit 5 targets, and I'll just use one skill. So if I'm hitting 5 targets with my whole symbol, I'm going to, as you can see, do 8 burning, and all of these mobs are taking around the same burning depending on, I think there's more than 5 targets that I'm sharing the damage between, but yeah, it's spreading a lot of burning with just one skill usage. Now if I use like my full combo, like say there's a downstate target and there's like 2 people rezzing, say there's like one person rezzing, right? I can go in, do a double symbol, and then as you can see, I'm not even hitting this target, but it's already got a 4k burn on it. This build has insane down cleave. It's really good. So that's mostly from Permeating Wrath. It really excels in like larger fights. In 1v1s, not so much, but in larger fights, you get insane value from this. So yeah, that scales up with this trait as well. So these 2 traits synergize pretty well. And yeah, let's go to Master of Consecrations. So I'm only using 1 consecration, but it increases the duration of it and reduces the cooldown of it. So this is a pretty decent Condi cleanse over time, and it also gives burning. And you can just put that in the middle of like a node, and anyone who, like in the middle of a team fight, people can't really play around this too much, because like every time they want to go in and out of the ring, they have to dodge out, or they get 2 stacks of burn for 9 seconds, which does 6k damage. So what people have to do is they have to dodge out, right? So in team fights, they really can't do that. So this really adds up in team fights quite a bit. And it cleanses conditions every single second, which is really good. So, and it's also on a really low cooldown, 28 seconds. So this skill is really good, and just having the Consecrations trait is just really nice with it. There's really nothing else you can take here. This is power trait and a long cooldown with low effect. So yeah, that's really good. You can also take different Sanctuary or any other kind of consecration if you feel like that would be better for the situation. Like if there aren't many power classes, or there aren't many Condi classes that you need Condi cleanse for. But the thing is, Purging Flames is still probably the best one because it gives you damage and survivability at the same time. And every class basically uses conditions anyways. So I feel like Purging Flames is the best consecration here. Yeah, so next we have Virtue of Retribution, which just gives you more retaliation duration, which is kind of nice with the Radiance thing here, which gives me more retal. And I also get retal whenever I use a Virtue. So yeah, you pretty much have it's not permanent uptime on retal, but a pretty good uptime on retal. So that's pretty nice. And Absolute Resolution. This gives you a slightly higher regen from the passive of the Wings of Resolve, but it mainly just is used for the Condi cleanse. It's kind of weird because the Condi cleanse happens at the end of your leap. So if you want to Condi cleanse someone, you have to kind of like land on them, whereas like if you're Core Guardian, you don't really need to aim it that well. and there's like a cast time, so it's kind of difficult. But for yourself, the Condi cleanse is really good because you cleanse 5 conditions, because the base is 2, and then with the trait is another 3. So it's just really good Condi cleanse, and you need that for a lot of situations. Usually, like when you're taking pressure, like it works out to cleanse conditions and get out, because like you're no longer crippled and chilled, and you can escape. So it's really nice. And yeah, another thing with Permeating Wrath is you kind of don't want to use your F1 skill ever, right? Because the passive doesn't proc when this is on cooldown, right? So the active removes the passive. So a lot of times you're just not using your DHF1 because you get way more value from the Permeating Wrath. So there are very few situations where you want to use Spear of Justice. Maybe like if you're out of everything and you just need to finish off your opponent, you can use Spear of Justice. But if you miss, you'll get punished very hard because your damage drops off quite heavily, and then you won't be able to finish them, period. And you could still possibly finish them with just, random auto attacks with the passive. But yeah, if you miss Spear of Justice, that's really heavy punish for you. So yeah, you want to try to stay away from using Spear of Justice, but there are still very few situations where you want to use it. Like if you're against a thief, thieves are really good to use Spear of Justice on because you can't really land many skills on them. So if you do land the skill on them, it kind of like guarantees that you'll get a lot of damage on them. Whereas if I'm just like trying to do all my damage to them and they're just dodging all over the place, I'm not going to land my passive anyways. So yeah, the Spear is really good versus thieves. And they don't really have too many ways to cleanse it, especially if you're not attacking them while the Spear is enabled, right? Because they get a lot of their cleansing from evading attacks. So yeah, that's pretty much all the traits there. Dragon Hunter, I take Piercing Light because I take the Healing Trap and the Fragments of Faith Trap. You'll see in quite a short time why I take this trap. But yeah, there's really not much else you can take here anyways. Crippling foes that you disable is not that important because we'll get plenty of cripple from this next trait, which is Zealot's Aggression. So deal increased damage to crippled foes, 10%, not too important. But you also cripple foes whenever your passive Justice triggers. So now we have Permeating Wrath will cripple in an AoE. So as you can see here, I do this and my Permeating Wrath is going off. All of these mobs have cripple. So I have AoE cripple now. So that's really good. And it's just another cover Condi as well. So you have cripple, you have Doom and Exposure, and then you have Burning. So you can get like 4 Condis up, which is pretty decent. Blind as well. So yeah, this is just really good because you also need to be able to land your skills. You don't have too many ways to lock down your target, so just having like permanent cripple is pretty nice. Though it won't be really permanent because it's only 1 second duration. But you have other things that can cripple, like Fragments of Faith, and if you really need to, you have Spear of Justice, but then you're not proccing your passive anyways. But it's still good nonetheless. Hunter's Fortification. So you remove conditions whenever you block an attack, so it doesn't necessarily need to be on your Aegis blocks. It can be your active Shield of Courage blocks. It can be on your Shield of Wrath procs, and it can also be on your Aegis. But it does have a 1 second ICD, so you can't get like 3 Condi cleanse if someone immediately hits your Shield of Wrath 3 times. It would have a 1 second ICD, so you need to space them out a little bit. But it's still just really good Condi cleanse because you're not running meditations, and that's where most Guardians get a lot of their cleanse. So you get your Condi cleanse from this trait, which kind of gives you like overtime Condi cleanse, and then you get your burst Condi cleanse from Absolute Resolution, and then you also get a little bit of overtime Condi cleanse from Purging Flames as well. So this build has pretty decent Condi cleanse, which is necessary for every build in my opinion, to have some Condi cleanse. So yeah, that's really good. And you also take less damage when you have no conditions, but that's really difficult to maintain. One thing that's important to notice is Defender's Dogma. So whenever you block an attack, your Justice active will reach its maximum charge. So, your passive. And it reduces the cooldown of your Spear of Justice. So this also synergizes with Permeating Wrath, because it's kind of weird how this trait works. It's a little bit confusing, but basically how your Justice passive works, right? There's an invisible buff that you have, and it's charging up behind the scenes. And say like I hit someone once, then it has 1 charge or whatever, then it has 2 charges, and on the 3rd charge is when it will give out the burning, right? The AoE burn. However, when I block an attack, Justice will be fully charged, so then my next attack will burn. So that means whenever I use a block and then I block something, I'll burn someone on the next hit. So this is really good for counter pressuring people while you have Shield of Courage up or Shield of Wrath up. Any kind of blocking is really good. And obviously Fragments of Faith also gives you blocks. And so like if I use Fragments of Faith on this and it triggers, it gives you these fragments on the ground, you can see. And whenever you pick them up, I have Aegis right now, so I can't pick them up. But I can pick them up, and it'll give me 1 Aegis every time I pick one of those up. And it drops 5 fragments, so that's potentially 5 resets if I space them out by 1 second. 5 resets on my Permeating Wrath, which is just giving me a ton of burning. And yeah, it's just really good. Another thing to mention about Fragments of Faith, right? Not just the Condi cleanse that you get from these, but it also gives you stability. So that's pretty nice. And, oh yeah, I forgot to mention, Piercing Light gives slow. So that's another Condi, but it's only 1 second slow. But yeah, just as many cover Condis as you can get is nice. But yeah, so that's pretty much all the traits explained. So yeah, Defender's Dogma is really good with Permeating Wrath. Like this whole build revolves around Permeating Wrath and just giving out as much AoE burn as you can. And just covering the Condis where you can. So lastly, we'll talk about the skills. We talked about Fragments of Faith, Purging Flames, and Purification, because, well, I guess you could take Shelter. Shelter is pretty nice too, right? Because it has block synergy. But there's way too many counterplays to Shelter. Like there's unblockable interrupts that can happen. It's just too punishing to get your heal interrupted, because it goes on full cooldown because it's a block. So you could have blocked something, and then if it gets interrupted mid-block, it counts as you having gotten some value from it. So you go on full cooldown. Whereas Purification wouldn't go on full cooldown. So it's just a lot safer thing. You can't get punished as hard with this. And it also heals for quite a bit more, because not only does it heal for more, but it also has a lesser cooldown with the trap trait. So yeah, I just like Purification. It also gives out Blindness and Slow, which can kind of like self-peel similarly to Shelter. So I think it's just better. Stand Your Ground I take because it's a stun break with stability. So this build likes to get in to the middle of everything, right? Because that's how you kind of like get all of your AoE to proc as efficiently as possible. So a lot of times you're going to be in the middle of team fights, and you want to be not getting ping-ponged around by CCs. CCs are pretty strong right now because of stability nerfs. So Stand Your Ground is a really good skill right now because it gives AoE stability to your team, and it also gives a little bit of retail as well. And as we talked about earlier, we have retail synergy with virtues. So yeah, we've got quite a bit of duration of retail, which adds up over time. It also gives it to your teammates too, so that's pretty nice. But yeah, Stand Your Ground is just really good. right now. So you have stability from that, and you have stability from Fragments of Faith. So you have a lot of resistance to CC with this build, which is nice. Lastly, Renewed Focus. You can take Dragon's Maw, but I feel like, even though it's a 40-second cooldown, which is pretty nice, I feel like not having Renewed Focus, even without the meditation trait, is just kind of, it makes you too vulnerable to being focused. So Renewed Focus is just really good because you reset up your like, say you use Spear of Justice and you can't really do any damage because you missed it or whatever. What you can do is you Spear of Justice, or even if you don't miss it, right? Like, say you have nothing and you're about to use like Renewed Focus, what you can do is you can Spear of Justice and then go invuln while your spear is doing burns to them, and then your spear is going to be off cooldown anyway, so you're never going to miss out on your Justice passive, and you can get a lot of damage out with the spear at the same time while you're getting value from your elite. Just getting more like mobility with the Wings of Resolve, more Condi clear, just the fact that you're in Virtues makes it valuable to get Renewed Focus, because like, even though this is a meditation, it's giving you Virtues synergy. And of course, Shield of Courage doesn't stun break because I go for the Permeating Wrath, which you can't really give that up for Indomitable Courage. But Shield of Courage is still really good because it gives, well, first of all, it gives protection to your allies and Aegis to your allies. But then it gives you like this frontal cone block, and how you want to use that is you kind of want to like backpedal a lot of times. So like, if someone is trying to get to your back, you want to be always facing them, so you want to like backpedal and do stuff like this, where like, or maybe I can let go of my mouse. Yeah, like I'm let going of my, yeah, right there, I let go of my mouse so that I'd always be facing the target, and just pressing my one skill there. So yeah, that's really good for just like defending against players, and as I said before, getting more Defender's Dogma. Also, another thing about Defender's Dogma is it reduces the cooldown of Spear of Justice, right? So like, if I use Spear of Justice and I just throw it out there and I kind of like make a mistake of throwing it out there, it does recharge a little bit faster with blocks from Defender's Dogma. So I can just go in and block things, and on a 1 second ICD it'll recharge that. So that is also really nice. So yeah, your F1 isn't taboo to use, but yeah, you kind of do want to save it. So yeah, that's pretty much everything. The playstyle of the build, right, is you want to go into a fight, you want to use your Scepter symbol and then immob them in that. And then from there you can do your burst. Actually, what you would do is you'd Ray of Judgment first, then maybe they'll dodge once, then you'll Scepter symbol and immob them in it. And then once they're immobed, you'll swap to sword, press sword 2, and then immediately just press both of your Zealot's Flames on top of them, and that'll get you a lot of burning. And then from there you can auto attack with your sword, or you can use Zealot's Defense if you think projectiles are gonna come at you. This will block the projectiles. And if you're in like a big team fight situation, the best way to do damage is to use Cleansing Flame, because not only will this cleanse your allies, but it'll do 10 hits in an AoE. As you can see here, I'm getting tons of burning from that. And if you don't have anything else, what you can do is you can auto attack with sword. So the sword auto attack, it does a 3 target AoE, but the third hit is a triple hit. So it'll hit 3 targets 3 times, which means you're hitting 9 times, which means you'll proc the AoE of Permeating Wrath 3 times. So you'll get 3 burns if you hit the maximum targets there. As you can see, it jumped from 3 to 6 burns there. So yeah, the auto attack on sword is really good with Permeating Wrath. And yeah, pretty much you just want to like You want to use your sword too to like stay on top of people, and then like use the aura of the burning from Zealot's Flame, and then just like auto attack in your team fights, and you do a lot of burning. You just basically, you're permeating burn, like, right? Like that's the idea of the build. And then once you've used a lot of your cooldowns, you can kind of use Shield of Wrath to regain them a little bit, and just like wait for cooldowns with Scepter and poke like that. Obviously you want to be blowing, purging flames in the middle of the node a lot of times for your team. And yeah, that's pretty much it. That's the playstyle of the build. So So if you like this build or these kind of build videos, like the video. If you want more, subscribe because more is coming. And also comment down below if you're a little bit afraid of the diseased dragon because you're on quarantine and you thought you were actually safe, but there's actually a disease in your own home, and that's the new dragon hunter build.